Hello and welcome to Faith Talks. In today's program, we'll be talking about marriage and divorce. Well, joining me in the studio today is Malika Bediako and Leslie Aki. Leslie, a pastor and a couples counselor, and Malika, a leader in women's ministry in the southern region of England here in the Adventist Church, and also a local child protection officers and working with the local borough on similar issues. Welcome to the studio, both of you.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to be talking about marriage and divorce today. And is marriage something that is needed, or is marriage not obsolete in 2013? Les?
When you look at the divorce statistics, it seems like increasingly many people do feel that marriage is obsolete. At the moment, we're seeing a divorce rate of around 42% in the UK. But at the same time, there are significant numbers who do value marriage and who still see the importance of raising children within the context of a settled marriage relationship. So while marriage is under attack, there are problems and there always will be challenges within marriage. It's never going to be obsolete.
But how do you know when you're standing there at the altar and saying, yes, I do forever and ever until death do us apart? Is that not a vow that's being taken serious today? Malika, what do you think?
Do you know something? If I think about myself, on the day of my wedding, I realised that I shouldn't go to the church. However, I still went because of all the family and all the friends and everybody that were going to be gathering there. And in hindsight, I should have just stuck to my guns and not leave. And and so many women and men that I talk to, before you go to that altar a lot of the time that you shouldn't do it. But because of all the money that's spent, and of course, like I said before, the family obligations, and people are waiting for this to happen, you go ahead with it.
I think that raises an important issue when it comes to marriages. I think one of the reasons why we do see so many marriages failing is that there is inadequate preparation beforehand. That's why I beat the drum for rigorous premarital preparation beforehand, because a lot of the times couples get married for the wrong reason and they don't really appreciate the challenges or the obstacles until they're in the marriage and it's too late to back out. And so we see a breakdown. But it's vitally important that there is rigorous premarital preparation beforehand.
And what do you mean by preparations? Because before you get married, you're looking at the dress, you're looking at where to live, you're looking at how do you survive on one or two incomes, and how many guests are going to come to the wedding. Is that not the preparation you need?
No, I believe, and I agree with Leslie, and I bang the drum as well, that proper premarital counselling needs to be done for at least a year before you get married. Because believe me, when you do the premarital counselling, there are so many things that come out. And I've had people say to me in the past, I never thought about it in that way. Or I never saw it in that way. And they realise that there's things that probably in the person's childhood or something that hasn't been rectified that needs to be rectified before they get married. I see a lot of families that are blended families these days. Two persons that have been divorced and they're bringing two families together. What's the relationship with one person to the other's children? And there's all those sorts of issues that need to be ironed out. Money, a lot of women like to spend, and a lot of men like to spend as well. But how do we handle money as individuals, and how are we going to handle it when we're together? There's just so many areas that need to be looked at. Culture. In this society today, we have cross-culture marriages. I often say to a couple, you may believe that you are both X, Y, and Z, but believe me, there's a difference in the way that you were brought up and the standards that you have. So I think there's just so many things that need to be covered, and it's covered almost completely in the premarital counselling. And so the time that you wait and do that pays dividends.
Yeah.
So tell me, money apparently then is a big thing that you need to come at least to an understanding of how the other view money.
Yes.
What are some of the other almost deal breakers in a marriage that you discover in premarital counseling?
Deal breakers. You can't actually say that this is going to be a deal breaker or this is not going to be a deal breaker. It's really how the couples relate to each other, because the same one issue with one couple is not going to be the same issue with another couple. So it's how the couple relates to specific issues, and that's the point of premarital counseling, is to help them to identify what issues for them are the deal breakers and what they can actually live with, because there's always going to be differences, there's always going to be challenges. They're never going to come together in 100% agreement on all issues.
And isn't it also, Leslie, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it also how you deal with the issues when they come up? Yeah. Conflict resolution, how to deal with them. And it's better that you learn before you get married how to deal with those. There's always going to be issues that you can't really deal with in the same method and in the same way. But at least it's good enough for you to be able to look at really how you're going to deal with it, because there can be real concerns when dealing with issues. Somebody might like to walk out the house when there's an argument going on, and doesn't stay there, and that's an issue. Somebody may want to be silent, and that in itself is also an issue.
The point's well made. The research indicates that couples in healthy marriages don't argue significantly less than couples in unhealthy marriages. True. The difference is that couples who are in healthy marriages know how to repair once they've had a dispute. So problems are going to be there, but it's how you actually relate to those problems that makes a difference between a healthy and an unhealthy marriage.
So now that we're talking about healthy marriages, how would you define healthy marriages? Is there such a thing?
Absolutely. A healthy marriage is one that, for me, fulfills the purpose for which God created it. The Bible indicates to us that God uses marriage as an analogy of the relationship that should exist between his church and himself. So a marriage is one in which love is exhibited, and love as defined in 1 Corinthians 13 and Galatians chapter 5. Not a wishy-washy, romantic, Hollywood type love, but a love that is demonstrated by a willingness to sacrifice for the purpose of the other person. And if you have two people who are doing that, who are seeking to outdo one another in love, as the apostle talks about, you're going to have a healthy relationship.
But isn't it true that often it is one person trying to sacrifice everything for the other person?
Not necessarily. I've seen some really healthy marriages, even within my own family, where there's sacrifice on both sides. And they've got open communication, and that's always important. No matter what happens, that there's communication there. I've got one of my cousin's children. She said, you know something, I never knew what my dad's name was for about 10 years. And the reason for that is because my mum always just calls him Sweetie or Sweetheart. And she goes, I thought that was his name, Sweetie or Sweetheart. So it's how people decide to communicate with each other is extremely important. And Leslie says something that is so real. And I tell young couples that all the time. It's not Hollywood. Yeah, it's not, and there isn't fireworks and all sorts of things going off all the time. And you're right, but once in a while, I know a healthy marriage where there were gifts that were given, every now and again. I know marriages where the husband at least tries to cook a meal for his wife now and again. He may not always succeed, but you know something, he tried. And I believe with a lot of women that is appreciated. And so she will sit there and eat the burnt offerings, thinking that it was made by somebody that loved her and cared.
And it is that balance as well, isn't it?
Yes.
That you are balancing, that you are kind of trying to outdo each other in lifting the other person up and wanting the best for the other person.
I think in terms of a healthy relationship is one in which people are free to be themselves. And I think one of the challenges that lies for couples is to create a safe environment in which they can be themselves. They can be vulnerable. They can share what's in their hearts without fear of criticism or rejection or being belittled. And once we create that kind of environment in which we can truly be ourselves, you're going to have a healthy relationship.
But you started by saying there's, over 40% of marriages fail today.
Yeah.
We have 40% of the population have experienced a divorce or anything. So there is a boundary then, or there is a breakdown in the healthy marriage. And we can talk about ideal marriages. But the reality is most people, not most people, but 40-some% don't make it. Why?
That's a $64,000 question. There can be many reasons why couples break up. I mentioned one before, that sometimes couples get married for the wrong reason. Sometimes there is unrealistic expectations out of the marriage. And again, that is militated against when you have effective premarital counseling. Sometimes there is abuse within the relationship, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse. There can be many reasons why couples break up.
Malika, you started out the conversation by sharing that you knew it was wrong to go to the church and to the altar. Are you still in that relationship, or is that something you want to share about?
No, that ended in divorce. It was wonderful for the first 5 years. I could almost say that there was fireworks and, going off almost every day for the first 5 years. But then after that, things went on the decline, and really sharply and quite quickly. And I was so busy that I didn't see some of the things that were happening. I saw some of them and recognised some of them, but I didn't see all of the things that were happening, because I still lived in that we could heal. I believed that we could heal the marriage, and worked at it for some time, because we had children as well. I was brought up in a 2-parent home, and so that's what I wanted for my children. And it declined really sharply, and before I knew it, it became quite abusive. And I got to the point where I knew that I couldn't take it anymore, and I wasn't coping too well. And so I asked my husband to leave. He didn't. He remained for a further 2 years. And then one day he kissed me on my cheek. I can laugh now. And went to work, and he forgot his address. He didn't come back. And I didn't see him again until 6 months later, which was difficult for me, but very difficult for the children as well.
Some people will say that you should just stay for the children.
Yes.
How do you respond to that? I
Yes.
mean, you left, or you got out of an abusive relationship
Yes.
where you had children, and you tried to
Yes.
remain in the marriage
Yes.
because of the children. What did that do to you as a person?
It made me decline, and start to go down into a hole that I didn't think I could get out of. I wasn't myself. I wasn't my old self. I had a mother of an ex-boyfriend came to London to see me. Not only me, but she was visiting with my mother. And just before she left, she said something that really hit me, that you had a light in your eyes when you were younger. And I realised by being here for the last couple of days, that light's gone out. And I believe that he's taken that light out of you. I was scared to do things. I was almost paralysed by what was happening. And I must say as well, I didn't know about a lot of the things were happening until after he'd left.
Can I just pick up on the question that you asked? Should couples stay together for the sake of the children? I grew up in a home where that was abusive. My father was violently abusive, and I remember wishing that my father would leave. And I think had my mother taken us out of that situation, we would have been better off than for her to remain in that abusive marriage. But the question often kind of assumes that if you're going to stay together, it's going to be in a bad relationship. It's not so much should couples stay together for the sake of the children. Couples should remain happy for the sake of the children. It's a complicated issue because there is research that shows that children can do better in an unhealthy relationship where their parents stay together than suffering the effects of divorce. So it's a difficult one to judge. It really depends on how destructive the relationship actually is.
And I agree with Leslie in that, I know some parents that have stayed together for the sake of the children. And however, it's usually the mother in a lot of cases, particularly in previous generations, like our parents' generations, that felt that they needed to stay with the husband, so as to be able to wait until their children sometimes are grown up. But in some cases, what happens when that happens is that one or two of the children may end up being damaged themselves, as particularly if they know what is going on. I know that a lot of women in the previous generation tried to hide a lot of the things that were going on, but sometimes the pain in their eyes told the story.
And I think, my parents divorced when I was in my early 20s, but I remember from a young child, preschool, waiting for them to separate because they were always fighting. And of course, being the oldest one, I thought, I could help it or whatever it is. But so I remember, even though it wasn't spoken about, that there was a conflict between my parents from an early on. Yeah. And I think we forget the impact it has on children, like you were saying yourself.
Yeah, that one of the problems is that we are the products of our upbringing. So if children are looking at unhealthy relationships, that's what's modeled to them. The tendency will be that we will follow the example of our parents. I've seen so many situations of children who have grown up in abusive homes who then go on to find partners who are also abusive toward them because of the psychological patterning. They for some reason are attracted to the same type of abuse which they came out of when growing up as a child. So there is a major problem with what is actually modeled to children, and that's perpetuated down through generations. So there is a challenge. But I think part of the problem that we have when it comes to this whole area of destructive relationships is that oftentimes when couples make a vow before God, they want to stick to that vow. And we are living in a society that doesn't take marriage as seriously as it should. And so people will hold on as long as they can to try and preserve the sanctity of marriage. But there does come a point where we have to appreciate that remaining in the situation is destructive, possibly to physical health, to psychological health, to spiritual health. And if that's the case, we may need to make a decision to walk away from that.
Can I say as well that when I got married, from the time I walked in through that church door, I had made a conscious decision in my head, and I had told my my then fiance, I had told him before that I don't believe in the D word. So if we go through with this, you're stuck with me for life. And I meant that. In my heart, I meant that. Because like Leslie was saying, I was brought up that the vows were sacred and they was before God. And so therefore, no matter what, I should stay with my husband through thick and thin.
And that's a little bit also, you're talking about taking your vows seriously. And I think most people do take them serious who's been brought up in a Christian faith or in any faith community where marriage is such a central part. You were talking about there's a frivolous approach sometimes to marriage in today's culture and society. But still we find many churches are very strict when it comes to not accepting any reasons for divorce. Why is that? Because clearly from a humanistic or from a human perspective, human rights or human value, there are things in a relationship that become so toxic that it is not God honoring to stay together. Why is the church being so wishy-washy on accepting divorce?
I think historically, there has always been a problem in the church with legalism. And that is not just within the realms of marriage, but across the board. And sometimes, we can say we have a biblical policy here, and anything that goes outside of that biblical policy is a sin against God. The Bible is there to give us guidelines. And when it comes to the marriage vow is there to preserve a healthy relationship. But if there are things going on within a relationship that destroys that vow or goes in contravention with that vow, then you really don't have a healthy relationship. You really don't have a healthy marriage. And sometimes within the church we can be too dogmatic and as a result cause people to remain in situations that is destructive, possibly physically, emotionally, psychologically. So there needs to be some wiggle room there, some latitude to say that, okay, it's the most important thing here is the preservation of life and the preservation of spiritual, emotional well-being.
So I'm going to challenge you a little bit here on this. Are you telling me that there are biblical reasons for a divorce? Are there biblical mandate in the Bible that says there are times when divorce is all right?
Yeah, well, again, this is a hotly debated issue. The traditional position is that divorce is only allowed on the basis of adultery. But there are those who will argue as to what actually constitutes adultery. If you have somebody who is physically abusive, they're not bringing any money into the home, they're not pulling their weight in terms of looking after children, is that individual faithful to their marriage vow? Well, we will say no. But yet the biblical position does indicate that divorce is only allowed on the basis of adultery, and now that's been extended to other types of sexual indiscretion, incest, homosexuality, etc.
So you're saying that it's only if my partner has sex with somebody else that is the reason for divorce. Many would also argue from a Christian or faith perspective that having an addiction to pornography would also be grounds for divorce, because that would also be seen as adultery, particularly in today's internet-based world. How do you see that?
Well, there is a strong argument for that. It depends on how you look at adultery. Do you look at adultery specifically in terms of physical indiscretion, or do you extend that to say that it takes in a more spiritual application to the term adultery? Our position is that divorce is only allowed on the basis of physical adultery.
So I want to talk a little bit about what divorce is, what constitutes a breakup in a family, in a relationship. Are there any hope for people who are struggling in the marriage, Malika?
Yes, there is. Around about 10, nearly 12 years ago, Leslie's predecessor, Bernie Holford, introduced me to a package called Divorce Care. I was didn't know what Divorce Care was all about in the beginning. However, it's a really good package. It's a really good Christian package. And I've had people that are of faith and non-faith that have come to Divorce Care over the years. And there has been reconciliation.
How can there be reconciliation when people are on the border of divorce?
It means that people need to be doing forgiveness. People need to, and it takes you through a journey of all the things and the implications with divorce are concerned, including, you know, the children, what it does to the children, and the things that Leslie has said, you know, that those children brought up in that home, what could happen to them later on in life, and they can replicate it. There's also a package with divorce care that heals the children from divorce at the same time as the adults are being healed as well. And so there are quite a few cases where there has been reconciliation. However, divorce care also helps you, if there is no reconciliation, to move your life on. Yeah. And still have kind of healthy relationships with your ex-husband or your ex-wife. And so therefore it's a really good package. I've seen women that, you know, felt worthless and that they were nothing, and have gone on to live productive lives, become teachers, become lawyers, and they really do say that package helped them to move on, to be able to do that.
And we'll make that a URL, or how to get a hold of that package, available at the end of the program. But Leslie, I just want to ask you also, the church's responsibility in this. How can we as a church, because I hear many people going through divorce feeling they were not supported by the church or the faith community. How can we as a community help people having healthy marriages, but also help nurture when people are going through a breakup?
Yeah, I think there does need to be a lot of education. And a lot of the times, what I've found in my own experience within my family is that sometimes when an individual experiences divorce, people then don't know how to relate to them. You know, they feel that maybe a particular sin has been committed, or we shouldn't be associating with that, or we just don't know how to relate to that individual. So there needs to be more education. There needs to be access to support. One of the problems that we have with problem marriages is that couples wait too long before they actually look for help, on average about 6 years, and oftentimes there's so much water that's passed under the bridge that it's too late to repair that marriage. And we are actually seeing in this country a slowing down of the rate of divorce. And one of the reasons given for that is that people in this country are now accessing help a lot sooner. So the church can play an important role in providing support for couples, not just at the stage where they're in crisis, but at every point. We need to support healthy relationships from cradle to grave. And one of the aspects of that is to provide crisis support for couples when they are going through their problems.
I think that's a very good note to end our program on, that there is hope for couples in crisis, but it is also the couple's responsibility to seek help, to speak to somebody who is able to help you through your situation. And I want to thank both of you for being in the studio today and for addressing a difficult topic. And why not add your own voice to the debate by visiting our Facebook group or email us your thoughts on today's program. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.